The next topic is earthquakes. Earthquake is shaking or trembling of the Earth's crust due to the relieving of excess amount of stress or pressure within the Earth's crustal plates, and they are so sudden that they cause huge amount of destruction. There are mainly three waves associated with Earth that are produced after earthquake has taken place. They are namely primary, secondary, and surface waves. Surface waves are the most destructive of all. They are the most destructive, whereas primary waves arrive first. They arrive first, that is before all the three waves, and the secondary waves, which are transverse in nature, they are the slowest waves. Secondary waves are the slowest ones, and the primary waves are the fastest ones. They are the first to arrive. The secondary waves arrive next, and the surface waves are the last arriving waves. We have discussed about all these waves while dealing with Earth's interior. Let's see certain terms associated with earthquakes. Focus. Focus is the region where the earthquake has occurred, that is the region with the high amount of tremors or release in stress, that is where the earthquake is centered at. And then epicenter, the shortest distance between the focus and the region on the Earth's surface is called epicenter. This is the shortest distance, and the point just above the focus is called epicenter. And the intensity of earthquake is maximum at the epicenter, as this is the closest point from the focus, and the loss of energy at this point, that is at the epicenter, would be minimum. And coming to velocity of earthquake waves, they would travel at a speed of 5 to 8 kilometers per second in the Earth's crust, that is in the upper part of the Earth, whereas they would travel much faster with depth as density increases. The next one is isoseismic line. It is the line where the line joining all points where the intensity of earthquake is similar. So what are the causes of earthquakes? Earthquakes are caused mainly due to compressional or tensile stresses associated with the crustal plates. When these compressional and tensile stresses act on the crustal plates, there is huge movement in the blocks of Earth's crust, which causes earthquakes. And there is constant change in volume and density of rocks below the Earth's crust due to varying temperatures. As a result, there would be change in density below the crustal plates, which would also result in subduction of regions in the Earth's crust, which would also lead to earthquakes. So based on different causes, earthquakes can happen due to plate tectonics or sliding of land along the fault line, or it can be a human induced earthquake. Plate tectonics, we have seen that there are mainly three kinds of edges, mainly the constructive edge or the divergent edge, the destructive edge or the convergent edge, or the transform edge. At the place of divergent edge or constructive edge, there are volcanic activities which give rise to mid-oceanic ridges, and as a result there will always be earthquakes with shallow focus. And in the destructive edge, there is interaction between the denser oceanic plate which subsides below a lighter continental plate, giving rise to the upthrusting of the lighter plate and resultant earthquakes. Sometimes the subducting plate can also be continental plates like the Indian plate. For example, Indian plate is sliding below the Eurasian plate, giving rise to great amount of earthquakes in the Himalayan belt, that is Nepal, Bhutan, and various in the Indian states. This is mainly due to convergent or destructive boundary. In the transform edge, for example San Andreas fault, which is a part of western USA, we see that a small part of this mass is moving upwards, whereas the mainland American plate is moving downwards, giving rise to a fault line, and earthquakes are frequent along this fault line. And slipping of land along the fault line is also a major reason behind the formation of earthquakes. This kind of faulting happens mainly during the formation of block mountains, or when the mass below the region of the Earth's crust is metamorphosized due to a high amount of heat and there is change in densities. Then a block can slide towards the Earth center, which might result in the creation of earthquakes. And the earthquakes along these fault lines are linear, that is, they occur along the fault line. Sometimes they can be of very high intensity, causing huge amount of destruction. And human induced earthquakes are mainly due to deep mining, underground nuclear tests, and reservoir induced earthquakes, and due to extraction of fossil fuels and the related voidness caused in the earth's crust, and the groundwater extraction when there is extensive extraction of groundwater. And the reservoir induced seismicity is associated with the building of reservoirs by humans, as there is change in isostatic equilibrium, that is change in the equilibrium of densities of the earth's crust. They can be small tremors which might cause earthquakes, but there are most of these earthquakes are less significant, as they don't cause much of destruction compared to the other kinds of earthquakes which are formed mainly due to natural effects. And based on the position of the focus below the earth's crust, the earthquakes can be divided into shallow focus earthquakes, intermediate focus earthquakes, and deep focus earthquakes. And these can be best explained using using the subduction process of a denser plate. We can see that during ocean collision, there is subduction of the denser plate, which might lead to shallow focus, which occurs at the point of convergence, and intermediate focus, which occurs mainly at the point where the rocks are metamorphosized, and the deep focus, almost where the plate is totally subducting and there is huge amount of pressure involved in this process. In the shallow focus, though the intensity of shallow focus earthquakes are very high, as most of these happen below the oceanic floor, the destruction caused is very little, but with a significant kind of amount of earthquake might give rise to tsunamis, which might cause huge amount of destruction. But the earthquakes associated doesn't cause any huge amount of destruction, as most of the shocks are absorbed by water. And at this zone where there is metamorphosis of rocks here, there is huge amount of stress relieved due to upwelling of these rocks in the form of magma, and there are associated earthquakes which are called as intermediate focus earthquakes. And in greater depths, due to change in pressures due to the subducting plates, there might be small amount of earthquake observed, as this is called as deep focus earthquakes. Though earthquake can be severe at this point at the deep focus, but most of the shock waves die by reaching the surface of the earth, hence they don't cause much amount of destruction. And all this region where the earthquake region associated with this kind of subduction zone is called as Benioff zone. And coming to distribution of earthquakes, most of the earthquakes happen along the Pacific Rim of Fire and the Mediterranean Sea and the Great African Rift Valley, and also all along the Himalayan belt, that is alpine mountain systems. And if you see this map, we see that most of the earthquake activity coincides with volcanic activity. Earthquakes are intense where there is significant interaction of plates, continental crustal plates. As a result, this region, which is always full with interaction between different plates, is a very high earthquake intensity area where earthquakes are seen frequently, that is the Pacific Rim of Fire. Other important region being the alpine mountain system, which consists of Alps and the mountains in Iran, Iraq, etc., and also most importantly the Himalayan mountains. For example, the earthquake that took place in Nepal this year is one example of this kind of earthquakes, that is earthquakes formed in the alpine system mountain systems. And earthquakes are also observed at the mid-oceanic ridges where there is constant outflow of volcanic magma. And the Tonga belt, which is a direct result of interaction between Indo-Australian and Pacific plate, is also a hotbed of earthquakes. And the parts of Indonesia where there is collision between Indian plate and the Burma plate, which is a minor plate part of Eurasian plate, even in this spot there is huge amount of earthquake activity. Though in Himalayan region volcanism is absent, the earthquakes are very intense. So what are the effects of earthquakes? Earthquakes give rise to lakes due to depressions caused due to the shift in huge volumes of earth crust. and they can lead to damming of rivers. For example, in the Run of Kutch region in Gujarat, that is, so in Gujarat, we see this is Run of Kutch region. There are certain natural dams formed due to earthquakes where the region slides below into the earth's bottom. As a result, a depression is created which gives rise to amassing of water carried by rivers, giving rise to a natural dam. And there are various landforms that could be resulted from an earthquake. And tsunamis are the most adverse effects of earthquakes. They can cause huge havoc on the coastline, and earthquakes can significantly change the surface drainage, where rivers can shift their courses considerably over a period of time. And along the fissures and cracks at the epicenter of the earthquake, we can see that there can be some form of uh, volcanic activity as well as gases and various other substances flowing from the earth's crust.